Okay, so looking at the code, I would go to the handle input. And when I look at track, MPG, and cost, it almost jumps out that we're returning an object. Okay, so that tells me that's a perfect place to start to implement a very simple class. Okay, and so that's what I would do. I'd be like, okay, so let's see, how could I implement a class here? So I would start with just actually putting the class in a file by itself. That's kind of the first thing. And generally you see this. And the thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to call it mileage. I'm going to end up calling it trip. Okay. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it trip.js. Okay. And I'm going to call class capital, right? Because remember our naming conventions say, even though we could have it lowercase, it's a way to help people understand. That's what it is. We do need a constructor, right? So what are the things we're going to take in, right? Let's go back. Okay. So let's think about it. We're going to take in mileage, miles, gallons, and price. Okay. So let's see. Over here, we could just take in miles, gallons, and price. Okay, because those are the values we need in order to calculate. Okay, and I want them on my new instantiated object. I want to capture those values for rendering into the table. Okay, so then I could use what we learned last time with this dot underscore miles equals miles. This dot underscore. Do you remember why we use the underscore? Is the whole encapsulation. Now we don't have to do that. And honestly, for our program, it would make it easier if we didn't do that. But I still think it's good to get used to it. Okay. Okay. So this dot underscore price equal to price. Okay. So now there's a couple options we have. We could actually create a method that we call out of the constructor that would calculate, right, the MPG and the trip cost. But, in a way, and actually I saw this when I was talking to Zach, he didn't even create this function. He just, when he built the object, he did it. And I thought that's a good way to do it. So I'm going to use his idea of this because I think it just makes it a little cleaner. So now I'm going to say this dot underscore MPG is going to be equal to, and I can just grab this, right? Remember us writing this, right? Okay, and so this dot underscore trip cost, if I can spell, then I can just grab this. Okay, all right, cool. Okay, so at this point, my kind of next logical step based on what we learned would be to do getters and setters. But I'm going to kind of skip that for a minute until I think about how I'm going to then, does just this class as it is, does it work? And where would I implement it? Okay. So that's kind of step one. Now that I have it though, what do I have to do to bring it into my code is I have to export it, right? I have to export trip, right? Actually, it's capital T, right? That's what I got to do here is export my trip. Now, do you remember then what I do inside of my main, right? I got to go over to main. And what have I got to do? I've got to import trip from, okay, and there's trip. Okay. So remember, this is kind of different colored because we haven't used it yet. Okay. Now, That's a question. Would it be here? Okay, so here's the next question. Now that we've set it up, right? Now that we've set up the basic structure without the getters and the setters for trip, now where would we use it? Okay, so in your README file, right, for this assignment, because first you had, if you wrote, where would we put, where would we implement the class, the trip class? Okay, so I want you to think about that for a minute. Go back here. We already have it here. Okay, I've kind of given you a hint by importing it into main. Okay, so here's what you want to do. Okay, so I'm actually going to over here get rid of trip. I don't need the index right now to kind of make things a little simpler in my code, right? So that's actually I do. So I do need trip because that's my object or my class. So right here, where we call the function and we pass those things in, okay, what we'd want to do here, instead of call that function, is we get to say new, and I'm actually going to call, this is where you reference the class that you've imported, and we're passing, right, those in, miles, gallons, price, and I'm going to change this to lowercase trip, okay, and then when I do that, okay, so then when the event listener, when the user submits, now again, we're going to break the code. We're going to end up fixing it, but this will break the code. But we do have to here, right? Because we've changed this. We still want to capture now, because this is the thing, right? There's really no, in the way I've written it, there's really no methods in here. And you might wonder why. Okay. So then that's where we'd think about, okay, let's first kind of just get the class itself, the structure of the class set up, and then think about where we could use it and how we could use it in our code base, because that's the key, is in our code base. If we were starting from scratch, of course, we'd be writing this class to then implement as much of the features as we could. So down here, I'd come down and do trip, okay? Because then I'm still using, okay? All right, so let's go test it. Let's see what we've broken. Okay, let's make sure there's nothing. And I do have some trip data, so the first thing I'd want to do is get rid of that. Why wasn't that trip data rendering? I'd have to go back and think about that real quick. Okay. All right, so let's try to enter something and see what happens. So if I enter 300, enter, and I enter 5, let's see what happens. Oh, okay. So something did happen, right? Let's see. Oh, sorry, I'm not over at the source. I'm not over at the source to see if there was an error. So let's try that again. Let's try that again over at source. Handle input. And now let's walk through. Actually, here's what I would do. So I'd come down here to the handle. Matter of fact, let's just, I'm going to refresh real quick. And then I'm going to set a breakpoint down at the handle input. Oh, sorry, it's the main, not handle input. It'd be main. Where is my main? There's main. Just wondering why it's not showing up real quick. Hang on, let me figure that one out. Wow, I'm actually surprised it didn't throw an error, because here's what I forgot to do, right? Is I need to do the script tag for, in this case, the type module. right? SRC equal to trip. Let me make sure up here. Oh, that's actually the other thing I did, is I didn't do trip.js. So there was two things in there. So let's see now if main shows up, because that, and again, I'm surprised the error didn't. Now we have main showing up. That's interesting. Okay. So I'm still going to do the same thing. I'm going to set a breakpoint right on the line that I'm instantiating the new class, instantiating the new object from the class. So I'm going to do 300. And then I'll do, okay, let's see what happens. Okay, so now instead of running that function, it's going to open up good. So now we see that the values got passed in. That's awesome. We see that the miles got created, gallons, MPG. Yep, trip cost. Cool. So now that the constructor has run, even though I don't have methods, it did instantiate that new object. Okay, which is awesome, right? So now if I hit this, I can either just let it run at this point to say, okay, show me the errors, which is one way we could do it, or we could just keep stepping through the code. Let's see if the next, because right now it is good to look at my data. So right now in my data, there's nothing in there, right? Because this is a step. Let's just go ahead. Oh, and did I just run over that? Let's run that again. So now, interesting. Look at this. Let's actually pull this up. So this looks different, right, than what we've seen before, because now there is one object in the my data array, but this object is a instantiated object. Okay. Okay. So now the question is, oh yeah, so that actually now we're running. Now we're going to run save, right? Because save data is where we're saving it to local storage. And let's come over here and we're going to go like, yep, okay. So then where would we see that? We'd go to applications and now we see it here. Okay. Okay. I already see some things that concern me that we're going to have to talk about. But now let's see what happens when we actually try to render. I mean, for one thing, just look at the key value pairs in the object are different because of the whole encapsulation naming standard, which I kind of hinted at that it would cause an issue. So now let's call render table. Okay, so this is just logic to see if there's anything in here. This render heading should be fine. Okay, that should be fine. The heading should be fine. Which, by the way, Zach also mentioned, why couldn't we make this more efficient? Again, it's like, how deep do we want to go in a beginning class? But you definitely want to think about how you can make your code more efficient. So now I'm going to say for each, right? So let's see what happens here. Each object, oh, there we go. Okay, we got the index, so that's okay. That's good, right? So now the question is, right? Let's see, in objects in here, because the way this is run, and this is where it's good to review what this code is doing, because the next thing that's going to happen when we start troubleshooting where it breaks it is going to help us. Okay, so now we're iterating over the object, we're creating the text content, we're appending it into the TD, right? Good for all those different, and you can see them there as they go through which ones are doing. Okay, and now we've dropped out of the four keys in object. And now we're rendering the delete and the edit buttons. Wow. Okay, everything so far looks pretty good. Oh my gosh, and we're even getting output. Okay, and now it's going to calculate average. And we're like, okay, let's see what happens here. Calling that. Oh, we see our first, in my case, example of issues with the output. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and let this run. Okay, cool. So actually, in consideration, it's not that bad. Now, again, this is a very simple class. It shouldn't be that bad. We haven't really changed that much. I'm actually, in some ways, and I'm curious if you are, surprised that it actually didn't break more. Part of that is the way the code was written, because we were just iterating over the object, right? Now, again, I'm going to come back here. Now, oh, yeah, that's right. At this point, we've lost context because the whole page has loaded. Okay. But remember, and this is one of the things I pointed out, what do you see here? When we saved it into local storage, do you see a difference with the way the My Data is storing the trip right now when we first entered it versus the way it's stored in local storage? Okay, so what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to stop at this point. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to see if you can, right? I don't know where you ran into issues here, right? You know, where, and matter of fact, here's the other thing. Let's go ahead and try delete. Okay, so we're getting an error on delete. Okay, sorry, on edit. There's an error on edit right now. It's saying that on here there's out of range. Oh, okay. Well, that one, that one kind of makes sense what that one might be. We'll see. I'll see if you can figure that one out. That'll be one of your code challenges. Okay. So here's what I want you to do. Based on the way I implemented the class, right? I want you to test the code and see how many things broke just by our simple implementation of this constructor instantiating the class. Okay. So in here, right, what broke and how can we fix it? Okay. So list the things that broke and tell me, what do you think? How can we fix it? And then we'll pick that up. Actually, I'll have you do this. I'll have you, and I'll say starting, I'll actually modify this to be the commit that just says step 1 of the implement code or the solution implementation. And then we'll continue with the next because like I said, I'm stopping here a little bit because I want you to think about how we would fix this code. So I'll rewrite this to be more clear.